day has fallen on today. Um, so that will be an adventure. So we will hop on. Um, we so last week we were talking last week and the week before actually on our Thursday seller sessions, we were talking about CMAs and how to use CMAs for pricing strategy. Now we're going to talk today about helping your clients prepare their home for listing just so that you've got the best chance of getting the most interest and the best offer for your client. Um, so when you show up, generally, I don't do this at the initial listing appointment, but depending on scheduling, if they've got a big chunk of time, then I might. If I'm at the listing appointment and we're talking about their goals, their plans, their timelines, whether they're also planning to buy, sometimes that takes up all the time and then I need to schedule this appointment for another appointment. But sometimes I can do it all at once. If they have a good 2 hour chunk of time, sometimes I can do both at the same time. So I usually just call this our listing prep appointment. Um, I let them know, that there are lots of things that you can do to control the outcome of your listing. You can't control the market, but there are lots of things you can do to give yourself the best outcome. And I let them know that in the current market here in Utah, there is enough inventory that they really ought to do what they can to make their listing shine in order to get a strong market value. So at the beginning of this appointment, I check in again. Hey, I know you're planning to list and then move out of state, or I know, you've got this going on. Is your timeline still the same? Are you preparing now? Do you think your home is ready to list right now? If it's a Monday, do they plan on listing by Friday? Because sometimes you'll have people reach out to you weeks in advance, sometimes even a month or two in advance. And that's great because you can give them plenty of things to do to prepare their listing. But sometimes you'll get someone who says, oh, yes, we want to list this Friday. And you're like, okay, it's Monday. This might take some doing unless they've been very proactive and have done it before. So I usually start by double checking their timeline. When do you want to list? Do you have an opinion or do you want my input and feedback? Let's see. If they are not quite ready to list, I'll set up an appointment time to go walk through the property. I'll often even push this if they're like, yes, we're ready to list. I'll be like, well, is it okay if I come over and walk through and give an outsider's opinion, an outsider's eye for details? Let's see. And then you tell them what their best bets will be at this appointment. You'll want to walk through the property. You'll want to remind them, lots of them will say, hey, what upgrades can we do that will give us, that will increase our purchase price? The most important thing to let them know is that most upgrades are not going to return dollar for dollar value when you list. So let's say they're like, well, should we redo the bathrooms? At that point, unless it's a really atrocious bathroom, you may want to say, it's probably not going to get you that much value. Or it probably won't get you dollar for dollar value. If it's really atrocious, you might say, yeah, you probably should do a generic, pretty basic remodel, new flooring, new paint. If they've got a pink tub, you might say, oh, well, this is a nice big house at a high price point. People are not going to want a pink tub. I mean, you can give them that kind of feedback, but for the most part, those types of remodels are not going to increase the sale price by the same amount that the seller is going to put into them. Things that I always tell my clients, full remodels won't return dollar for dollar. Cleaning, patching, and painting is always where I start because cleaning, patching, and painting will always give you a better return on investment than what you put into it. So I always walk the property and just remind them, hey, you'll want to clean this. Look at touch points around handrails, around doorknobs, on the edges of doors. Make sure you say, hey, if you like deep clean this, like white glove type clean, and that will usually give them the best return on investment as far as time spent put into the home and getting it ready to list. Cleaning is cheapest way to make a better impact. Then patching and painting. Um, I always tell my clients, um, pull down lots of like personal photos. If they have like a big wall that's got dozens of small pictures on it, I might be like, hey, this might be the time to take those down, patch and paint. um, if you walk through the home and you notice that your client has um, political paraphernalia, I would absolutely recommend that they take that down in the current environment. No matter what it says, I would probably say take it down. Um, then go through and have them patch and paint, um, because fresh paint, even if it's just over patch spots, makes a much bigger impact than just having little holes in the walls. um, and they'll see a lot more excitement on their listing. Whether the value necessarily increases or not really will depend on the property, but they'll see much more interest um, when people see a property that has been prepared like that. Okay, so patching, cleaning, painting. Um, at this appointment, I'll walk through the entire house, the property, any outbuildings that they have. Make sure that if you're going through a larger property like a farm, that you set aside a nice big chunk of time, because you'll want to go through and see if there are any big issues that you'll need to address or that could affect the value of the property. Um, Tell them your impressions. Let them know, could you add a baseboard here if a baseboard's missing? Because that is a cheap way to make a big difference. Make sure that gets clean, point out things to them. Sometimes if you've got a decent rapport going with the client, you may even want to take in painter's tape and just do like a blue tape type walkthrough that you do with a new build, where you just mark things that need attention. um, Obviously, if you're on shaky ground, you might have to adapt that to work with a client who might be less receptive to your input. But if you've got someone who's really enthusiastic and who's like, I want to put the elbow grease into getting this to look great, go ahead and stick painter's tape on things. Can you replace that cracked outlet cover? That's something that is going to make a big difference in just how people perceive the house. Recalking in the bathroom is an incredibly low price way to make the bathroom seem more updated and seem fresher. Um, so I always, if they've got peeled caulking or if it's stained or gross or torn, I'll recommend recalking. Um, let's see, if your clients are going to be living in the home during property showings, um, I always include staging. Usually I'll include it at this appointment. I almost never hire a stager myself unless it's a really high value property. Um, but I do have one that I refer to my clients if they feel like they need it. Most of the time, at this same appointment while we're walking through, or at an appointment right before listing, when I go and check and see if they've done the things I said, because that will change how we price the home and how we expect it to behave like the week we list. Um, so whether it's at this initial appointment or whether it's through a final walkthrough before I list, I'll go in and I'll point out, I'll say, hey, get your house as clean as it can be, as organized as you've ever had it, and then remove a third of the furniture, or remove another piece. Make sure it feels nice and open, and then take another piece of furniture out, store it in your garage, put it in a storage unit, keep it at your mom's house. Um, because the least expensive ways to make the house seem bigger is by pulling more stuff out of the home. Um, we talked recently in one of these sessions about closets. You'll want to, when you're looking through the home and checking in on closets, I usually recommend my clients remove at least a third of the stuff that's stored in their closets. Just because that's like a sales psychology thing. If somebody opens up a closet and it's stuffed full, they're instantly going to assume that their stuff is going to have to be stuffed in. Like, oh, if their stuff doesn't fit, mine might not fit. So what you want to do is make sure that the closets are at least a third of the space left. Tell them, hey, box up, if it's summer, box up all your sweaters, put them in the garage, box up all your snow boots and your ski gear and put them in the garage. Most sellers will just put things in boxes in the garage, and that's totally fine. I just ask them that they leave walkways around the edges at least so people can comfortably get around um, and see the dimensions on the walls of the garage. Um, okay, so again, when we're walking through rooms, lots of people don't realize how much furniture they have in there. If you've got coffee tables and they're not like super along with the decor, you've got end tables, those are the first things we'll pull out. If you have a home that has a smaller footprint, you may even want to recommend that they pull out a couch or something, because sometimes if you have a home with a smaller footprint and you have a really deep couch, the whole room will look small and dysfunctional when it really isn't, just because of the furniture choice. Um, I always store a leather futon in storage at my house. And sometimes if they have a really big couch, I'll be like, hey, move that one out. You can use this leather futon. I bought it for like 130 bucks on walmart.com or something, just a faux leather futon, and it just looks nice and clean and it's much smaller. Um, so sometimes that can help open up a space. Um, if it's a pricier listing, you will probably want to bring in a stager unless the people that are living there already have it decorated really cute. Because in those really high value properties, people will often expect them to look really sharp if they're going to spend that kind of money on a property. Um, okay, so remind them to clear their closets so they look bigger. Um, Clear off counters. Absolutely clear off counters. Make sure kitchen and bathroom counters are empty of any and all personal stuff. Pull off the hygiene stuff. You can put it in a box or a tote under the sink. Um, Really, I mean, make sure drawers have been cleaned out and wiped out and look fresh, because if it's attached to the house, like a drawer or a cupboard, those are fair game to be open. Just remind people of that. Just say, hey, they shouldn't be touching your personal furniture. But I mean, if there are built ins, you might see people opening those and looking inside. If there's drawers in the bathroom, drawers in the kitchen, cupboards in the kitchen, you'll see all of those be opened. So you want to make sure that they've gone through all of those and have wiped them out, um, and that they look nice and organized. Let's see, replace all burnt out light bulbs in the house. That's something that comes up very frequently in due diligence. Is people will say, hey, the light bulbs in this room weren't working, and they're concerned that maybe it's an electrical issue when really it's just that you haven't replaced the light bulbs. So encourage them to go through the house and replace all of the light bulbs in the hallways and the bathrooms, make sure they're all lit, storage rooms, the garage, make sure those are all currently working. um, just because that will get them ahead even on due diligence. At this appointment, I also look for anything that FHA might flag. Have any of you guys um, ever had FHA flag something in their FHA appraisal and you literally can't, your clients cannot purchase the property until it's been fixed? Um, it happens. It happens a bunch, actually. Um, one of our agents here at Sweet Utah Homes does a few transactions a month, and they're almost all FHA. And he probably has FHA mandated repairs more than half the time. Now, this is something, if your client is in a bind and your client's like, yeah, we can't do any repairs at this point during this walkthrough, you'll want to highlight some things. Hey, FHA won't approve this. They'll flag you on this. So maybe we can't even list the house as being willing to accept FHA, um, because they'll for sure flag that. I mean, things that they'll flag: uneven concrete. If you have a gap of, I can't remember their exact amount. If it's less than 3/4 of an inch, they don't ever call it. If it's bigger and it's like a trip hazard or a deep crack or in the foundation, they'll usually flag that. Missing handrails are probably the most frequent thing we see if it's more than two stairs. Um, so we see that a lot. Sometimes you'll see it where you have like maybe 3 steps into a garage and there's no handrail. FHA will almost always flag that, whether it's inside or outside of the home. Peeling paint is One of the biggest ones is if there's peeling paint and the FHA appraiser notices, they won't lend on it until it's been sanded or brushed with a wire brush and then repainted. So at this point, if the seller's like, yes, we would love to be able to accept an FHA offer, um, then you'll want to bring to their attention, okay, you'll need to do this, take care of that. For the peeling paint, just take a wire brush, rub off anything that's like flaking off, and then repaint. Um, Another big one that gets flagged almost every single time is the double strap. If there's no double strap on the water heater, um, so if your client starts giving you pushback and they're like, hey, we're not in a place where we can afford those repairs, or we're not in a place where we have the time to make those repairs, um, your job isn't necessarily to like make the choices for them. Your job is to tell them, hey, here's the deal. If an FHA appraiser walks through and does an inspection, there's a decent chance that they'll flag any of those things, at which point in your contract, if they have a certain amount of mandated FHA repairs in the contract, you have to do up to that amount of FHA repairs without any other negotiations. But just understand, if the repairs go above and beyond that amount, we can't close without those repairs being done. Now, sometimes the buyer will come in and say, oh, I'll do that. But that's not a for sure thing. And you could be 2/3 of the way through the process, and all of the sudden the lender says, yeah, we can't lend on this until this and this are done. If your client's like, absolutely not, we won't be doing anything, you'll want to explain to them um, some of the ramifications of not accepting FHA as a form of financing. Because when you list the property, you say what types of things you're willing to accept, whether it's seller finance, lease agreements, USDA, conventional, only cash, um, you, FHA rehab loans, you can select any of those. Um, but just remind them that if it's a lower priced property, I would say anything really below the median price. I mean, at this point, we're looking mid 500s at least for that. So if it's under $500,000, you'll probably see more FHA offers, more people hunting for FHA loans in that price point rather than conventional. Conventional loans are often for people who are selling a property and buying another because they have enough equity. Um, but if it's someone first time home buyer, maybe they only have 3.5% to put down. And so they might not be able to qualify for a conventional loan, because only periodically do we see conventional loans that will take less than five. They used to have them more often where you could get a 3% conventional, um, but not so often anymore. So if the home is under 500,000, you might say, hey, we have a really big part of our buyer pool that will likely be using FHA for their financing. If you're not willing to do these things, our buyer pool will be smaller, and so the process may go slower. We may not see any competition. We may see very little interest. So you just spell that out for them and just make sure that they understand the ramifications if they aren't willing to do the types of repairs that FHA might flag. Um, Honestly, if it's something that I'm pretty sure, like one of the things that I've mentioned, for FHA, if it's the peeling paint, the double strapped water heater, missing handrails, often I will just ask them to make those before we list. I'll be like, you can just fix it up real quick. A handrail kit from Lowe's or Home Depot for outside the home is $75. A handrail for inside the home is not that expensive. I mean, honestly, if it happens later in the process and they're like, we have to put a handrail, we don't have any money, but they have a 2x4, a 2x4 will work for FHA, but it's not visually appealing. So I would hold on to that for like a worst case scenario. So make sure that they understand how those repairs might impact their sale. Make sure you discuss cleaning with them, clean windows, tracks, doors, walls, light switches, inside closets. If they push back on any of that and say, we just don't have time, you can say, hey, I can recommend a cleaner you could hire to come in. If they're like, we just don't have the money or the time, then you can say, well, we can absolutely still sell it, but it will affect people's enthusiasm about the property. Homes that are clean and fresh sell far faster than ones that are not. Um, so it may not directly affect their value, but things will be more difficult without the extra effort upfront. If you see some things that might be deferred maintenance that your client doesn't want to deal with before listing, get quotes. You know, if you're selling a house that's 35 years old and your client is like, oh, the roof is original, the furnace is original, the air conditioner is original, you may want to say, hey, you know, that's cool. Things like that, like the roof being that old will likely come up, especially if it's FHA. Um, but you could say, hey, we don't necessarily need to deal with that now, but why don't we grab some quotes so that we have them on hand, so that if it does come to negotiations, you've got a quote. If they come back and say, hey, um, we want you to replace the roof, um, and you can say, hey, well, we've got a quote to replace the roof. It's going to be $12,000. Would your buyers be willing to raise the purchase price by 6 grand and we'll cover the other 6 grand? So if you already have those numbers and those quotes, that will put you in a stronger position when it comes time to negotiate. So if you do notice deferred maintenance, I would recommend that your client gets quotes. Oftentimes a roof quote or a furnace or AC quote, like you can usually get those day of or within a couple of days. Um, so at this point, just say, hey, grab quotes on those so that we have them in case we need them. Let's see. Um, at the pre-listing, a pre-listing inspection is also a decent idea, but very few people are willing to do that. People who do a pre-listing inspection where they bring in a home inspector and just give a tune-up on everything that the inspector highlights, those transactions always go really easy. Sometimes I would recommend that if someone's going to be moving out of the property and the home will be vacant while we show it. Just because if they've moved out of state, it might be tricky to arrange for access to the property. So if they have the funds and the ability and they're looking for just an easy process, sometimes I'll say, hey, before you move out, why don't you hire an inspector to come in and look through it? And then you can see if there's anything that you need to take care of, or before you move, you could line up people who you would bring in if the buyer's inspection also reveals the same things. Um, let's see, paperwork. At this point, um, leave them with a copy of the seller's disclosures or send them over to them via SkySlope. Um, have them start filling out the listing input form. You have to have the listing input form back um, before you can list. The seller's disclosures don't necessarily need to be back until you go under contract, but it's a decent idea to get those back up front. Um, can you help them? Yes, you can help them on the listing input form. I'll usually leave a copy of a previous listing of the same home with the listing input form so they can pull square footage or tax ID numbers from that. As far as helping them with the seller's disclosure form, be super, super careful. You really shouldn't, I mean, the thing you should just say over and over again with that is fill it out to the best of your response or the best of your ability. Make sure that it's as honest as possible. Be as clear as you can be, because that's legally binding. Um, Document that survives closing. Most of the real estate purchase contract does not survive closing. Sellers' disclosures that are provided as a part of due diligence survive closing. So make sure that those are accurate. Make sure the exclusive right to sell is filled out right about this time if it's not already been filled out before. If the house was built before 78, make sure they fill out a lead-based paint disclosure. Um, and at this point, I also have them download and send me any HOA documents that they have, because we will need those for due diligence. Sometimes things like the lead-based paint disclosure and the HOA documents, I'll just stick those on the back end of the MLS so that their agent can pull them from there right from the get-go, so that they can make the lead-based paint disclosure part of their offer so that we don't have to fill out paperwork later. If you're selling a property for someone you're related to, you'll want to fill out a disclosure of interest as well. And I would put that on the back end of the MLS so that they can include that as a part of their offer, should they present one. Um, at this point, once they've done their list, if you have to go back through and they say, hey, come back and see how it looks now. If you go back through, it's ready for photos. You'll want to schedule photos. Um, Stuart owns Cheap Shots, and you guys get a brokerage discount. If I'm in a hurry, I always use Scatterscapes just because they have a 24-hour turnaround. Like they always email the photos to you the following morning. Um, and so I always go with them because I can get it scheduled super fast. From the time I schedule it until I have the photos back is usually no more than 3 days. Um, Great photos are essential. Please don't take your own photos unless you really know what you're doing. Um, that is one of the fastest ways to set your clients up for failure is poor photos, because that makes people way less likely to want to come and tour the home. Um, let's see. Um, Place your sign in your key box after this point, but no more than 3 days before you have an active listing, just because you don't want to risk your license at all. Once,
Got a question.
yes,
Why do you have to disclose that you are related to the seller? What's the point of doing that?
that's required in the state of Utah. If you are related, it's just a form in the MLS that you have to fill out. I don't know how far away the relation goes, but I know anything like up to parent, grandparents, sibling, aunts, uncles, nieces, and nephews. You'll see the disclosure of interest, and it's very specific. It'll say either the client is an agent or the client is a relation to the agent. And that's just to protect yourself because you have to disclose it in the state of Utah. But it is just a straight up form on the MLS, and it's super common. So,
okay.
so you'll definitely want to make sure and do that. Once photos are back and forms are filled out, we can list it and we'll walk through that next time. Does anyone have any questions on this pre-list, how to advise your clients on getting their listing prepared? Any questions?
Just a comment.
Yep.
Always, when I look at a house listing and the beds are not made or house is dirty, usually the customers don't want that house.
Yeah.
100% out of 100% don't want that house.
Yep. Absolutely. Cleaning is such a big thing, especially before photos and showings, open houses. If they've never been clean in their life, now is the time to do it.
Yep.
It makes a huge difference. Thanks, Javier. Any other questions? Okay. Well, we will see you guys next week. Have a good day.
Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.